I did not scream when my entitled brother shattered my dinner plate across the patio. I did not even flinch when my parents sat there and smirked. Instead, I grabbed the one thing he loved most in this world, and I made him watch it sink. Thank you for watching video. Before I take you back there, do me one small favor. Take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. It helps more than you know. My name is Jolene. I am 61 years old, and for my entire life, I was the designated servant of my family. For 35 years, I worked as a 911 dispatcher for the county. I spent decades sitting in a windowless room, breathing through the absolute panic of strangers, learning how to separate extreme emotion from necessary action. You would think my family would respect a career built on managing crises. But to them, I was just the unmarried sister and later, the quiet widow who was expected to absorb every burden, every insult, and every demand they threw my way. My husband Blaine and I built our lives from the ground up. We bought a beautiful 4-bedroom house on a large, wooded lot in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. We paid for it with overtime hours, skipped vacations, and sheer, unrelenting hard work. When Blaine passed away 4 years ago, this house became my sanctuary. It is currently valued at over $800,000. Every floorboard, every garden bed, and every brick holds a memory of the man who actually loved me. But my family did not see memories. They saw a bank account waiting to be drained. My younger brother, Vance, is 38 years old. He is a luxury car broker and a self-proclaimed cryptocurrency expert. He leases a flashy Porsche, wears suits that cost more than my first car, and possesses an utterly staggering amount of arrogance. He is the golden child, the undisputed prince of my parents' fragile empire. Whatever Vance wanted, Vance received. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon in early June. I had invited my parents, Lenora and Alden, along with Vance, over for a family barbecue. I spent all morning preparing Blaine's special hickory-smoked ribs, roasting vegetables from my own garden, and setting a beautiful table on the stone patio. My parents arrived first, complaining about the heat and criticizing my landscaping. Vance arrived an hour late. He did not bring a side dish. He did not bring a beverage. He only brought his sheer entitlement. He strutted onto the patio, his designer sunglasses reflecting the afternoon sun, and immediately began his usual psychological warfare. "You are sitting on a gold mine, Jolene," Vance said, swirling a glass of my expensive wine. "It is completely selfish for one old woman to hog so much square footage. You should sell this place. Give the money to someone who actually knows how to multiply capital." My father nodded in absolute agreement. "Your brother is right. You do not need all this space. It is a waste." I swallowed the heavy, bitter lump in my throat. I served the food, hoping the meal would silence their profound greed. I placed a massive, perfectly glazed rib on my plate, alongside a generous scoop of potato salad. I sat down, exhausted but trying to maintain the peace. Vance reached across the table, ostensibly to grab the salt shaker. But his arm did not stop. He swung his heavy forearm directly into my dinner plate. The sound of the heavy ceramic shattering against the stone patio echoed through the quiet backyard. My beautiful meal, the food I had labored over for hours, was entirely ruined. Barbecue sauce splattered across my shoes. Smashed potatoes smeared into the grout of the stones. The patio went completely silent. I froze. I waited for the apology. I waited for the shock. Instead, Vance looked down at the mess and let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Oops," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Well, skipping a meal will not hurt you at your age, Jolene." I looked at my parents. I expected my mother to scold him. I expected my father to hand me a napkin. But my mother simply picked up her fork, entirely unfazed. "Do not make a fuss, Jolene," my mother said coldly. "It is just food." Something inside my chest completely snapped. For 4 decades, I had been the dutiful daughter. I had paid for Vance's college textbooks. I had paid for my parents' medical bills. I had swallowed their disrespect to keep the family intact. But looking at their smug, satisfied faces, the illusion shattered. I was not looking at family. I was looking at predators who thought they had cornered easy prey. They did not know they had just woken up the dispatcher. I did not yell. I did not cry. My blood ran completely cold, replacing my grief with a profound, icy clarity. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. My knees popped, but my spine was completely straight. I walked over to the side table where Vance had carelessly tossed his brand new $1,500 Apple phone. I picked it up. It felt heavy and expensive in my hand. Vance frowned. "What are you doing with that?" I did not answer. I took 6 slow, deliberate steps toward the deep end of my swimming pool. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the blue sky. I held his precious, uninsured device directly over the 8-foot deep water. I opened my fingers. The phone hit the water with a heavy, satisfying splash. It sank instantly, spiraling down to the very bottom of the pool. I turned around, looked Vance dead in the eye, and smiled a very small, very cold smile. "It is just a phone," I said softly. The patio absolutely exploded. Vance leaped out of his chair, screaming obscenities that echoed across the neighborhood. He rushed to the edge of the pool, his face entirely drained of color, staring into the water as if his entire pathetic life was drowning down there. My mother shrieked, clutching her pearls, calling me a hysterical, ungrateful monster. My father slammed his fists on the table, demanding I pay for a replacement immediately. I did not say another word. I turned my back on their screaming, walked straight through my house, picked up the keys to my vehicle, and drove away. I left them entirely alone in the backyard with their ruined lunch and their sunken treasure. For 2 days, my house was utterly silent. I did not hear a single knock on my door, but my phone was constantly buzzing. I received 27 text messages from my family. Not a single message asked if I was okay. Not a single message apologized for humiliating me. Every single message was a demand for $1,500, threatening to take me to small claims court, telling me I had completely lost my mind. On the 3rd afternoon, my neighbor, Thayer, knocked on my front door. Thayer is a 70-year-old retired school teacher who lived next door since before Blaine and I even moved in. He held a plate of homemade cookies, but his face was profoundly serious. "May I come in, Jolene?" he asked gently. We sat at my kitchen table. Thayer looked at me with deep sympathy. "That was not an accident, Jolene," Thayer said quietly. "I was out in my garden. I saw the whole thing through the fence." He looked right at your plate. He measured the distance before he swung his arm. I closed my eyes. "I know, Thayer. I know." "There is more," Thayer continued, leaning forward. "Last week, I was walking my dog past your parents' house. Vance was standing on the porch with your mother and father. I heard them talking. Jolene, I heard exactly what they are planning." My stomach tightened. "What did they say?" Thayer took a deep breath. "Vance said to your parents, when we get her into a care home, I will take the equity for my startup, and you guys get the recreational vehicle." The room started to spin. My breathing stopped. My own parents. My own flesh and blood. They were not just tolerating Vance's terrible behavior. They were actively conspiring to declare me incompetent, lock me away in a nursing facility, and liquidate my husband's life, work to fund Vance's fake lifestyle, and buy themselves a luxury camper van. It was a profound betrayal. It was a level of evil I could barely comprehend. But the dispatcher in me took over. Panic is useless. Evidence is everything. After Thayer left, I started cleaning my living room to keep my hands busy. That is when I noticed it. My mother had left her old tablet computer on my sofa during the barbecue. She was always forgetting it everywhere. The screen suddenly lit up with a notification. It was a message from Vance. I picked up the tablet. I knew her passcode. It was Vance's birth year, because of course it was. I unlocked the screen. What I found inside made my blood turn to absolute ice. There was a group chat titled Future Plans. I was not in it. I scrolled to the very beginning. For months, they had been coordinating their attacks. Vance had literally typed out instructions for my parents. "Keep pushing her buttons. We need her to snap. If she throws a tantrum, record it. We need a paper trail showing she is mentally unstable since Blaine died. Once we have enough proof of a breakdown, we file for the conservatorship. They had staged the plate smashing. They were trying to trigger a violent reaction to use as legal ammunition against me. They wanted to strip me of my human rights, take my home, and throw me away like actual garbage. I did not cry. Crying was for victims. I sat at my dining table and methodically took photographs of every single message on the screen using my own phone. I forwarded the screenshots to 3 different secure email addresses. I printed hard copies using my home printer. I secured the evidence. Then I quietly wiped the screen clean and placed the tablet exactly where my mother had left it. 2 days later, the mask of fake concern slipped perfectly into place. My mother came over to retrieve her tablet. She brought a basket of expensive fruit. She sat on my couch, adopting a sickeningly sweet, worried tone. "We are just so worried about your mind, honey," Lenora said, patting my knee. "Living entirely alone is making you unstable." Throwing that phone was a cry for help. Later that evening, my father called. He casually brought up the upcoming hurricane season, though we live in Ohio, and asked where I kept the original deed to the house, just in case he needed to keep it safe for me in his fireproof safe. The next morning, a massive bouquet of flowers arrived from Vance. The card read, "I forgive you. Please let us help you find a good psychiatrist." They were circling vultures, waiting for me to collapse. So, I played the prey. I smiled softly at my mother. I told my father I would look for the paperwork. I sent Vance a polite text thanking him for the flowers. I let them believe their psychological trap was working perfectly. Little did they know, they had just walked blindly into a snare of my own making. The following morning, I drove straight to the downtown office of Merrick, the fierce, no-nonsense estate attorney who had handled Blaine's life insurance. I sat in his massive leather chair and handed him the thick folder of printed text messages. Merrick read through the pages. His jaw tightened. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with professional disgust. "They are trying to build a fraudulent case for a medical conservatorship," Merrick explained, tapping the papers. "In fact, I received a very strange phone call last week. A young man claiming to be your primary caregiver called my office asking how a fiduciary manages a forced equity liquidation if the homeowner is placed in assisted living. I refused to speak to him, of course. That was Vance," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I want to stop them. I want to build a wall so high they can never even look at my property again." "We will do exactly that," Merrick said, pulling out a fresh legal pad. "He thought your silence was weakness. We are going to show him it was strategy." Over the next 2 weeks, we executed a flawless legal defense. I underwent a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation by an independent, board-certified doctor, proving I was completely lucid, exceptionally intelligent, and in perfect mental health. Then, Merrick drafted the ultimate weapon, an irrevocable trust. I transferred the ownership of my home, my savings, and every single asset I possessed directly into the trust. I appointed a neutral, state-licensed fiduciary institution as the primary trustee in the event of my actual incapacitation. I signed an ironclad medical directive and a durable power of attorney that specifically, by name, excluded Lenora, Alden, and Vance from ever making a single medical or financial decision on my behalf. The legal fortress was built. They had absolutely zero jurisdiction over my life. I went back to living my life beautifully. I planted new roses. I took a cooking class. I ignored their subtle, probing text messages. Vance grew entirely desperate. The trap was not springing fast enough for his mounting debts. He needed his payout. So, he orchestrated his final, fatal mistake. He called a mandatory family meeting at my parents' house. My mother called me, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. She warned me that if I did not show up, they would be forced to call the county sheriff to perform a wellness check because my isolation was terrifying them. It was a blatant threat. It was an ambush. I smiled into the phone. "I would not miss it for the world, Mom." I did not go alone. Saturday afternoon arrived. The sky was dark and heavy with summer rain. I walked up the steps to my parents' house. I opened the front door and stepped into the living room. Vance was standing by the fireplace, looking incredibly smug, wearing a tailored suit like he was the chief executive officer of the family. My parents sat on the expensive leather sofa, their faces arranged into masks of deep, tragic concern. Then, Merrick stepped through the front door right behind me, carrying his heavy leather briefcase. The smug expression on Vance's face entirely crumbled. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice pitching up in panic. "This is a private family matter." "This is my attorney," I said, taking a seat in the velvet armchair. "Since we are discussing my future, I thought my legal counsel should be present." "Please, Vance. Proceed with your intervention." Vance swallowed hard, looking at my parents for support, but they were staring at Merrick like he was the Grim Reaper. Vance tried to recover his arrogant posture. "Fine," Vance sneered. "We're here because you're a danger to yourself, Jolene. You destroy expensive property. You are paranoid. You are utterly incapable of maintaining that massive house. We have decided it is time for us to step in and assume control of your affairs before you ruin everything." I did not say a word. I simply nodded at Merrick. Merrick unclasped his briefcase. The click echoed in the completely silent room. He pulled out a thick stack of documents with heavy, official federal and state seals. He dropped them onto the glass coffee table with a resounding thud. "Mr. Vance," Merrick said, his voice echoing with absolute authority, "you are completely delusional. My client is of exceptionally sound mind. Furthermore, there are no affairs for you to assume control over." Vance blinked, his face twisting in confusion. "What does that mean?" "It means," Merrick continued smoothly, "that the property, the bank accounts, and all associated assets no longer belong to Jolene as an individual. They are the exclusive property of a heavily protected, legally impenetrable irrevocable trust. The designated trustee is a federal banking institution. Additionally, your names have been explicitly barred from any power of attorney or medical directive indefinitely." The silence in the room was absolute. It was deafening. The Golden Child's fragile empire was shattering into a million irreparable pieces right before my eyes. "You cannot do this," my father bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "That is family money." "That is my husband's money," I corrected him, my voice cutting through the room like a blade of ice. Vance began to panic, his breathing ragged. "You are crazy. You are a paranoid lunatic. You made all this up in your head." That was the moment. The beautiful, profoundly satisfying moment I had waited for. I reached into my designer handbag. I pulled out the thick stack of color-printed screenshots from my mother's tablet. I tossed them into the air. The pages fluttered down, covering the glass coffee table, covering the legal documents, covering their lies. "The Future Plans group chat," I said, my voice completely devoid of mercy. "The instructions on how to trigger my anger. The detailed timeline for liquidating my home to fund a failing cryptocurrency startup." My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. She looked at her tablet and the printed pictures, realizing exactly how she had been caught. I stood up. I looked down at the three strangers sitting in that room. "The recreational vehicle?" I asked, looking directly into my mother's terrified eyes. "Really, Mom? 40 years of being your dutiful daughter, 40 years of carrying this family on my back, and you sold me out for a camper van." They had nothing to say. The facade had dropped entirely. There was no defense against their own written words. They were completely, utterly destroyed. "If any of you ever contact me again," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but echoing with ultimate finality, "Merrick has a second copy of those messages ready to be delivered to the county prosecutor for elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. Do not ever come near my home again." I turned around and walked out the front door. Merrick followed quietly behind me. There was no screaming as we walked to our cars. There were no demands for apologies. There was only the staggering, suffocating silence of absolute defeat. 6 months later, I am sitting on my beautiful stone patio, sipping a glass of iced tea, watching the fireflies dance over the swimming pool. The consequences for my family were severe, exactly as they deserved. Without my financial backing and without the ability to steal my equity, Vance's startup completely failed. His leased Porsche was repossessed in the middle of the night. He was forced to declare bankruptcy and move into the damp basement of my parents' house. They are now permanently stuck with each other, trapped in a house filled with resentment, arguing over grocery bills, completely cut off from the daughter they tried to destroy. Meanwhile, my life has never been more vibrant. I possess a profound peace that no amount of their money or fake prestige could ever buy. I finally learned that blood does not make a family. Respect makes a family. Loyalty makes a family. And sometimes, the most empowering thing a woman can do is look at the people who are trying to break her, smile, and completely lock them out of the kingdom she built. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your own peace and your own assets? I would love to read your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more daily stories, and remember, never let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting exactly what is yours. Stay strong and see you in the next video.